the woman that I'm working with, who's working through the paralysis, one of the things she's finding with herself is that she was a project manager, and so she was very much into. She's a kind of driven type A type personality, and now that she's injured, she has to find the other side of herself. She has to find the patient. I got to trust in the process. I can't push this. It's out of my control. And so somehow, in a strange way, when you go through a process of healing like this, in a way, you can get more whole. Parts of yourself that you had forgotten, you start to integrate.
This is the Recovery After Stroke podcast with Bill Gassiamis, helping you navigate recovery after stroke.
Hello and welcome to the Recovery After Stroke podcast. If you are a stroke survivor with a story to share about your experience, come and join me on the show. The interviews are not scripted. You do not have to plan for them. All you need to do to qualify is be a stroke survivor, or you are one of the fabulous people that help stroke survivors. Go to recoveryafterstroke.com/contact, fill out the form, and as soon as I receive your request, I will respond with more details on how you can choose a time that works for you and me to meet over Zoom. In today's episode, I'm joined by Yuji Oka, who is the founder of the Spiral Movement Center. Yuji helps people with neurological disorders and acquired brain injuries to reestablish the connection between the brain and body. Developed over 35 years ago, Yuji's approach to rehabilitation has helped thousands of people gain a deeper awareness of their bodies and dramatically improve their motor functioning. This is a very deep philosophical conversation which you may benefit from if you listen to more than once. Yuji Oka, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
My pleasure. Thank you for being here. I am excited to have you here because I understand a little bit about what you do. And the way that I understand it is that you help people with neurological injuries overcome the deficits and rewire the brain. But
that's correct.
In your words, why don't you tell me what you do and how you got to be in the position that you're in now?
Yes. I work in a field called somatics. And in particular, I work what I call body-mind somatics. And in this field, basically what you're dealing with here is just a focus more on the internal experiences and the learning process that a person is going to go through when they're dealing with their body. And so, like, for example, a lot of people who have gone strokes or any kind of brain injury, there's the traditional sort of medical stuff that happens that needs to happen, all the drug treatments, surgeries, all of that might be happening. But then there's always the piece, that is how you actually feel inside, how much you feel like yourself. And that can range from a physical part, an emotional part, mental part. And these are things that there's no real metrics for. It's your experience that counts. And in my field, that experience is a leveraging tool. That when you understand that your experience, your internal experience, is actually telling you something. It's something telling you deeply about yourself as a person, your learning process, and how you're going to deal with the challenges that are ahead of you. So I work with kids, I work with adults. My background, I have a background in physics and dance. So I'm interested in the scientific part of this, I feel that we all experience things in similar ways inside. There are laws of our internal experience. And at the same time, I recognize that there's a sort of art to this. Everybody is going to enter into that healing process through their own door. And in that way, it's a really creative process that lends itself to the lens of dance and art and how people actually get excited and motivated to fully express who they are.
Okay, beautiful. What came first, the study of dance or physics?
Physics.
Did that lead to dance? How did that evolve?
I come from a line of scientists. My father is a fairly well-known scientist, and so I was expected to be a scientist. And I love mathematics. I love the logic and the process of it. And during that time, I actually studied things in neurophysiology. I learned all the medical stuff. But during my studies, I was just one big brain. I felt like I was I understood everything through the lens of the intellect, but I didn't really know my body. And I just started taking dance classes in college. Actually, I started very, very late, but I fell in love with it, and I had to change. So there's something that drove me to change my field. Actually, I only had one credit left. I was at Cornell University. I had one credit left, and I couldn't finish the degree. I knew if I finished that degree, I'd have to go into physics. So I decided I'm gonna take the leap, and I decided to go to
Wow.
modern dance. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So you had to physically stop yourself from finishing your physics studies because you knew that if you had finished them, there was only a one path for you to follow.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. And I mean, it wasn't like it was a failure type situation. I was doing well in
No.
school and all of
Yeah.
that. But I think this is part of it. All of us are driven by these internal needs. We know we're sort of driven to the things that we need to do. And in my case, I was always interested in uh, uh, you know the beginning of things. I did math and all of that, but I was interested in philosophy, and that's sort of the beginning of thinking.
Mm. Mm.
And I felt that through dance, eventually I found my path in dance. I realized I didn't want to do ballet and modern art. I had a company and all of that, but what I was really interested in, what unfolded for me as I started working with people who were injured, is the beginning of dance. I just love this idea that when we are exploring our bodies, we have this miraculous thing where we somehow know, we go through a process of learning how to move and how to use our bodies. And we live in this body through our whole lifetime. And that process of unfolding from the very beginning is what interests me. And particularly, I think this is what's relevant to the people who have experienced brain injuries, that they have to start at the beginning. And that process, it almost is like a second childhood for them.
Mhm.
And I love the sense of discovery. Really, this is a passion of mine to see people um, revisit those different points in their life, or areas in their life that they experience without necessarily a full cognitive awareness. But with the older people that I work with, it's like they have to learn everything all over again. And I love that process. I think it's like, it's a fascinating process.
I made a couple of points as you were describing that part of your career with
Mm.
regards to the dance and the sciences. And you said, philosophy was part of the beginning of thinking. I imagine what you're talking about is critical thinking. It's not the part of thinking just like about something general or basic, but deeply thinking and thinking about the way you think even. Is that what
Yes.
your version of thinking is? What type of thinking are you talking about?
Yeah, I think it's even more rudimentary. I have a lot of people that I work with, children I work with, and people who have gone through brain injuries. They lose their capacity to talk sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And even at the very beginning, they might be in a place where they've lost sort of that higher level consciousness. They're unable to form words, thoughts in the way that they used to. And so they come back to the basis of thinking, and thinking starts really with the senses. Your eyes, your ears. You pick up these experiences through your sight and your sound, and these perceptual experiences eventually become, concepts and thoughts and, laws of nature. But initially, they're just physical experiences. And so the thinking becomes a perceptual process. So when a brain person experiences brain injury, for example, they very often they can't sometimes talk even. And they realize what they can do is they can sense their bodies, and they start to find like just spatial relationships. What does it mean to move my arm in this direction? Like, what is that? And that spatial, temporal, energetic sort of process of exploring your body is really sort of a primal form of thinking. It's perception and it's thinking. So it really goes deep. I feel like where I start with thinking is um, just the sensory motor stage kind of thing.
I love that you've
This is
taken thinking out of the head. I love that you've taken thinking out of the head, and thinking is part of what the body helps you to do. And it reminds me of a moment in my life, and probably many people will relate to this, when I think, simply based on the fact that somebody said something on TV, and I have immediately formed an opinion, an idea, and I just run with it, not really going into the process of paying more attention by using my senses, my eyes, my ears, my nose, and understand the lay of the land, rather than I just take words that somebody has said and I embody them, and then I just run with it with a lazy version of thinking, which is just perhaps for the sake of feeling like I have something to say about a topic that I'm not an expert on.
yes, yes. I think thinking really has to deal with our relationship with reality and the universe and the world around us. And this is the Piaget idea, is that you build up all these physical experiences. Let's say, for example, um, you lift your arm up. At the very beginning, your body isn't. You don't consider it part of you yet. It's sort of just an object of exploration like anything else. And you're discovering things about it. You realize that it has weight, it can fall, that it can feel pain, and it can pick up objects. And all of this is the precursors to thinking. And when thinking is connected to that concrete experience, um, it becomes a very, very, you start to understand what its function really is in life, and that is to to have you come into relationship with the things around you, and how to navigate and interact with people's objects and things like this. So yes, this is thinking. And I'll tell you, there's a very fascinating book that that really inspired me in my work. It's a book by Goethe. He's the German literist, but he also was a scientist. He did something about colors, and he made a book where he made all the observations that you feel when you look at colors. So if you look at a bright light and you look at a dark place, you'll see the image of that light in that place.
Mm.
And all of these things, he has like 800 observations, and each one of them you can do now. Like, it's everybody experiences the same thing. We experience it slightly different. We might have more powerful eyes, less powerful eyes. But we all experience these things. And I feel like all of this like raw data that we start with is really, again, thinking, body, mind. This is why we call it body, mind. It's like this primal place where we make all our connections together.
Yeah. Do you recall the name of the book?
Yes, it's The Theory of Colors.
Okay. For anyone that's listening that might be interested, The Theory of Colors. I'll have a link in the show notes so that people can refer to that if they feel like it. Okay. So thinking, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that, from a pragmatic point of view, people who are going through that process where they're going through rehabilitation after brain injury are going to find these similar things that everyone goes through, just like in this book. And I think this is really fascinating. They're going to have to learn about how their body is aware. They're going to have to hook into how to initiate, what does it mean to have that spark where a movement starts again, or a function of your brain starts to get back online. All of these is part of this body mind process where everything is starting at the basic thing of thinking and feeling and moving.
So in that case, does acquired brain injury from either a trauma to the head or a stroke or something along those lines, does that unlearn, has that made us unlearn a process of thinking, and therefore is part of what you do helping people relearn the somatic version of thinking?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So, for example, one of the things I sent you was a video of Dylan. He's a
Yes.
16-year-old boy, and he had exactly this problem. He had gotten to a point where he had the brain injury, but there were certain things that he couldn't solve. There was a tremoring that was starting to happen. It was stopping all his functions, and he could literally not grab onto objects and so forth. And he had plateaued out. And in order to overcome that tremoring, he had to re-examine pretty much everything. He had to re-examine first, just the physical part of his situation, but he had to find out his relationship to pain. He had to figure out that a lot of what he was doing was to focus on, sort of, he's very much into sports, so he was focused on the competitive nature of sports. And he had to understand that in order for him to heal, he can't be worried about other bodies and competing with it, but he has to know himself first. And that process became very, very important. And he also had to relearn how to, what it meant to have confidence in himself. What does that mean? Normally we measure it by what we can do, but in the case of brain injury, we can't do that much at the very beginning. And so it had more to do with self-understanding, had to do more with just like learning, hey, the way I'm going to feel good about myself and confident about myself is to know what makes me tick.
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
How I process things. And so, yeah, he basically had to relearn a lot of those things. And that's part of the healing process, not just a bunch of exercise he has to do, but he has to kind of re-examine who he is as a person. And so he is sort of reinventing himself as a thinker, as a feeler, as a mover, everything.
It's identity level.
Yes, exactly.
Relearning.
Absolutely.
Okay. So immediately, because I did watch Dylan's story and I thought it's amazing. And Dylan was injured in a car accident. He had his head damaged. As a result of that, he developed he had some deficits, and those deficits seem to be progressing to getting worse. And I think that's somewhere around the time where the family got involved to the next level and interacted with you. And basically seemed to, you seemed, in my mind, to decrease the strength of the neural patterns for tremor and increase the neural patterns for not tremor.
Exactly. It was a very interesting situation. Basically, what was happening is that he was on a drug to just calm his nervous system. And then what happened was he went off that drug, and all of a sudden he started getting this tremor in his hand. And that tremor just kept getting increasing. And it got to the point again that when he would reach for objects, he would literally just knock it over. He couldn't close his hand, he couldn't grab it. And it was causing him the problem. It was sort of his stopper that was stopping all the progress on all these different levels.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was dealing with that situation, there were lots of dimensions there. And this is what you find in body mind stuff, is that there's not just the physical aspect, the neurological aspect of it. There's something in the brain that's not working. But there's all these circumstances that create that thing. And one of them, for example, was social shame. That is, he didn't want people to see him. So he would hold his hand and kind of like try to restrain it. It was kind of like the more he held it, the more that energy buildup would happen. And so he was kind of creating this feedback because he didn't want to move his hand. So that was one thing. The other thing that was happening is that there were lots of pockets of pain in his body that hadn't been released. And his body was kind of being triggered by these things. And he had been living with the pain for so many years that he kind of didn't know that it existed. So there was a pain part that was also happening. And then there was also the thing that was the most interesting maybe was that he was trying to learn how to move his body from using this part of his brain, the frontal lobe stuff, the thinking part of his thing. So he was trying to will his hand to do it. But moving happens from a much more primitive part of your brain. It starts from the cerebellum and your spinal cord. It's coming from a more unconscious part. And you kind of have to let your body do it. And this was the biggest thing that he had to learn, that in order to go back to moving, he couldn't do it through his head. He had to really tune into his body and kind of relax, calm down, feel, not be afraid of looking at pains in his body, and just working all that out before he could actually then start to really realize what it meant to control his body.
Mm. It's counterintuitive because he had to not think to move his body. He had to just do.
Yeah.
Because
in fact, meditation.
Yeah. Because thinking about it, perhaps in the head-based thinking, not the somatic version of the thinking we've already discussed. Thinking about it is basically overcomplicating it in my mind. It sounds to me like if I have to think about moving, when I had to learn how to walk again, it was so difficult to do. It was so draining, so energy sapping that I couldn't sustain it for a long time anyway. I had to have faith in my legs' ability to give the feedback to me and my brain so that when it was on the ground, even though it felt different, I had to believe and trust in the fact that it was on the ground, and the feedback that it was giving me was it was a new language, but it was feedback nonetheless that it was on the ground. And then therefore that released the tendency of my knee to overcompensate, and also created a situation where if my knee wasn't overcompensating, it also wasn't undercompensating because my knee would buckle. And as a result of that, I started to feel and understand the way that my leg was now responding, rather than trying to think about how it was responding and looking at my leg falling, at my foot landing on the ground, and then wondering whether or not I had it in the right position or not. So I kind of had to learn visually what the position of the foot, knee, and leg were when they were in the quote unquote correct position. And then once I visualized that and knew what it looked like, I had to believe that my body was doing it and risk falling over and risk injuring it, even though that what would not have been the best outcome. It would have been a learning opportunity to say, okay, I have to make an adjustment and allow for that thing that caused me to lose my balance, trip over, my knee to buckle, or my knee to overextend, or my hip to give way.
Yes. How old were you?
I was 37.
37. Wow. So it's later in your life. Okay, yeah. So it's a real I'm working with a woman who's uh about 40, and she described something very similar to you. She was on a trip, and she was in the Dominican Republic, and she went down a water slide. Someone went on after her, hit her in the head, and she became a quadriplegic there. And she's just relearning. She just came back. They did an emergency surgery. And one of the first things she realized is that, she's, you know, um, they're doing all these physio. And the first thing she just realized that she found effective was exactly what you said. She was spending this time looking at her feet.
Mm.
And that visual, just establishing that visual in her mind, was her first link to actually being able to move. So when it was out of sight, out of mind, she couldn't do anything. She was just feeling spasms. But when she got in the chair and she would tilt the chair so that she could see her feet, that was the first moment that she started moving her feet.
And if I have to be honest, the very first moment before that, and actually I was 40 years old. I had to learn how to walk again after my brain surgery at 40. My whole
Wow.
my whole episode started at 37, but at 40 was when I had brain surgery. But honestly, the first time I imagine or I saw my leg in the correct posture, correct position, landing on the ground correctly, was before I'd started rehabilitation. It was in hospital, waiting for rehab, imagining myself walking the perfect stride before I had started rehabilitation. Maybe a day or two before I first got on my feet for the first leg therapy session. And I was just imagining myself, I was the third person, running a story in my head, imagining myself and seeing myself walking and creating an image of what that looked like. And then I applied that image to the actual first session of therapy. And then I was able to remove myself. Then I was able to take my head out of the equation and then just trust in that process that I just explained.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go one step further back, the very first day after brain surgery, when I woke up and I couldn't walk, I was attached to a harness onto the ceiling, and that was holding up my weight. And I recall, and I have a photo of this, I recall myself holding onto the parallel bars and looking down to see where my foot was landing. So there was 3 stages to that. It was the initial stage where it wasn't working at all, where I didn't know the new language that my leg was giving me. It was the second stage when I was imagining the correct physical process. And then the third one where I was having faith that my leg was going to be able to deliver the outcome for the correct walk.
Yes. You've outlined a process that is very, very important and very, very deep inside the situation. We're initially looking for movement, purposeful movement. That's the goal. And that's not usually what happens. And sometimes we have these involuntary movements that are happening. And for example, that's what this woman was dealing with, involuntary movements. And, literally no voluntary stuff whatsoever happening in that situation. And that relates to this first stage. And, in this stage, things are already happening. Like sometimes when that spasticities and things are happening, people look at that and say, oh gosh, look at myself. But, all of that is actually positive. Your body is like actually moving, just the fact that it's moving, whether it's voluntary or not voluntary. There's this whole unconscious process where your body's trying to figure out, where am I? What am I doing? How does this work? And that second stage where you're actually starting to, look at your body and making these connections, there's all sorts of things, again, going underneath the hood. That even though there's not the movement per se happening, still purposeful, your nerves are kind of rehearsing themselves. They're kind of like figuring out, okay, what's it like again? What's that impulse feeling where, what's it supposed to feel like? And you're looking at yourself, you're trying to send impulses in your body, it's hit or miss, some things work, and it leads to a movement, and other times it just leads to nothing. It's dead. You're just worried, is it offline? What is it? This whole exploratory process that's happening on the level of your muscles, nerves, your bones, all inside your body. And then, yeah, then there's this thing where it gets translated into movement. So this like general process that you're talking about is exactly kind of the area that is this body mind somatic process, where it's more on the unconscious part of things. It's just happening under the hood, and your conscious mind is just trying to make a connection between, where it's at, and trying to find a language that is connected to that, physical unconscious processing that's happening deep inside your body.
Physics came first, then came dance, and then from dance, did you move into this space? How did you
Yes.
start to move into this space? Tell me about the transition from dance to this space.
Yeah, well, I was doing dancing, and there was a grant that was brought up, and I was in Cleveland at the time, and it was a big grant. It was a big push to put arts into the school, and as it turned out, I just had a small company, just two people really, and but somehow I got this grant, and I was charged with making a curriculum for a school with kids with behavioral difficulties, special needs, autism, ADHD, developmental delays. And initially, I wanted them to just dance. I thought, oh, I'll just go in there, I'll start making dances, just have them improvise, whatever it is. And then I found out, like, that doesn't work. These kids, again, have to learn from the very beginning. They're not in touch with their bodies. They freak out, they shut down, they don't know themselves. And so what was just an art project at the very beginning became this like very important question, like, well, how do I get them to connect with their bodies? And that's pretty much how it started out, working with kids. These kids are amazing because they're just like people with brain injuries. Like, if it works, it's like so connected. Like, you see them connecting, and if it doesn't work, nothing happens. So you're just in this place where you're working with bodies that are really finely tuned to progress and, figuring out ways to do it. And I learned a lot in that place. I learned, for example, that a lot of times when you're dealing with patients and uh, um, kids with disabilities, you try to simplify, and you try to dumb it down and make things rigid, like really programmatic. And the success I had was because I didn't do that. What I tried to do was it's work on skills, but to do the opposite. Instead of like drilling it into them, I had them go through an exploratory process where they were like trying to get at that movement from different ways. I put them on inclines, working with partners, working with weights, slowing it down, speeding it up, just getting them uh, to explore. And I think that this is crucial for anybody who's working from that place of injury, that it's actually initially an exploratory process. It's not about strengthening, it's not about learning the skill immediately, but it's first of all exploring your body and just figuring out again, how does this thing tick again? How do I get aware of it?
It sounds like what you're doing is creating the opportunity for information to come in very different formats, in many different ways, where perhaps information to the body came in one rigid way in the past, because of their not connectedness to their body, and therefore having a larger sample of ways for information to become available to the body, you can then potentially impact the body for somebody who has a unique way of getting to that, for that information to pass through, to actually get through and make the connection where you see the connection has been made. It sounds like
That's correct.
you're broadening the possibility of how to positively uh, impact somebody's body.
Yes. Sometimes, again, I think this is something that sometimes we're finding in the medical field. I work with a lot of medical professionals. I work with a pharmaceutical company. I've worked with universities. Um, and what I find fascinating is, the medical field is finding that out as well, is that I think they're in the business usually of working with people who have had very strong abilities, and then they have an injury, and so you're trying to get them back from where they are. But usually, it's not, um, that drastic thing that we sometimes see with brain injuries and kids with strokes, where it's like, no, it just went way back. It's like it's not like, oh, can I, you know, it's not just about walking. It's like,
Mm,
can I even like feel at home on body again?
mm,
Can I feel the same way I used to feel?
mm.
So when you start from the beginning, you go through a whole different process that is very, very individual, and it just speaks to who a person is. Like,
Mm.
you just go back to that time when you were, under 6 years old, and you're just trying to figure out, like, before any of this stuff of higher level stuff, just how do I move my body, and how do I feel myself, and when do I feel comfortable, and how do I self-regulate, and all of those issues.
That sounds earlier you mentioned they've got to experience a second childhood.
Mm.
It's really important to be young at heart in that case, whether you're
Yeah.
70 years old or 60 years old or 50 years old. You need to uh, be young at heart and get curious about the possibility of what you're doing, how you're going about it. I remember my kids looking at their hand and going, what is this thing? I'm moving it, it's twisting, I can see it, it's touching me. And then at some point, when they stop looking at it like that, you know that they've made the connection that it's them. But until that time, they haven't made the connection that it's them, and they're poking themselves in the eye, and they're putting it in their nose and in their mouth, and it's just going places. And then one day they observe it, and you can tell something different has happened in their head. They've changed. And
Yes.
I feel like we need to give people the permission to get back to that stage in their life. They've been there before, and perhaps they thought they were beyond that and they were past that stage of their life. But I think brain injury does necessitate the curiousness that you instinctively practiced when you were a child, way before we overthought being childish as a bad thing, rather than now being childlike is potentially benefiting your recovery.
Yeah, yeah. You briefly touched on that identity, and it is about rebuilding your identity. Your identity is initially starting is always connected to your body. It's always connected to who and what you are, what you can do basically, and it starts with your body. And when that gets disrupted to the level that it does with brain injuries, everything changes. I'm wondering for you, things must have changed completely for you when you got your brain injury. In terms of everything.
Well, yeah. So the I think if I have to describe the hardest part for me is uh, for the people who are into astrology. I'm a Gemini.
So am I. Yeah.
A Gemini is two, two-faced, two people in one body, whatever you want to call it. So
Yes.
what I experienced when I woke up from surgery was that my left side now felt completely different from my right side, straight down the line.
Mm,
And it is a completely different version of myself. The challenge that
mm,
I have is that both of them need to coexist at the same time. It's like being conjoined twins, okay? And then somehow trying to create create cohesiveness, harmony between the two conjoined parts of me and get them to work as one, even though they are definitely both two.
mm.
So they have their own identity, they have their own way that they express themselves, they have their own way that they speak to me and give information to me, they have their own way of behaving, and I've got to bring them together so that, say, when I'm writing a book or doing a podcast, we're all on the same page. And that's really the hardest part, because when I'm in flow or in a zone, I don't notice it. But when I notice it, I notice it. My left side feels colder. My right side feels not, well, my right side feels like it's always felt. My left side feels tingling, burning, reacts to temperature, reacts to the wind, gets tired quicker. It's really a different part of my personality. It's a second iteration of me, and it occupies only half of my body, right down the line.
Yeah.
What's interesting is on the left side, obviously, is where my heart is. So I have definitely noticed a different way of how my heart expresses itself compared to how it used to express itself. And I'm wondering, I don't have an answer for this wondering, but I wonder if it was the opposite, if it was switched where my left side remained quote unquote normal and my right side was different, how I would experience my heart. Would it have just remained the same expression that it always was? I think now my heart feels more sensitive, more easily, I'm not sure if the word's offended, or more easily hurt or upset than before. But my heart coming online has also enabled me, well, I explain that as it's come online in a different way, and it has enabled me to create better conversations, deeper conversations, more philosophical thinking, more emotive thinking. It's definitely guided me to do what I love more than what I used to do before. Before, I used to do what my head told me I needed to do to make money, to make a living, never to do anything like this, which is free for everybody to download. So yeah, it's, and then I've had to get curious about, how do I live with these two versions of myself? Because people experience me differently, but I experience me differently. And sometimes it's hard to sometimes the ability to notice the difference is really difficult to live with. Sometimes it really, if I'm having a bad moment, a bad month, a bad whatever, sometimes it's like, wow, it's like I'm in a relationship that sometimes I'm in a very good relationship with my two halves. Sometimes each of my halves are in a very bad relationship. And I'm speaking about them because I'm noticing it as a third person while the two of them are going at each other. It's intensely insane.
This whole idea of dualities and polarities in our being is very, very part of body mind somatic viewpoint. And there's this is something historical. It's not, again, not just associated with brain injury. For example, just to give you an example, the right and left side of bodies have been traditionally being associated, like the Latin form for left is sinistra or sinister, and right,
Yes.
right is right.
Yes.
And so there's been an association with the left side being, or left and right side being good and bad. But then there's a neurological basis for this too. As a lot of us know that the right side of our brain and left side of our brain, there's an analytical and a sort of creative side that people have started to find. There's a neurological basis for, and then I just think, just in terms of personality, as you say, these polarities exist, in the astrology or whatever it is. The woman that I'm working with, who's working through the process, one of the things she's finding with herself is that she was a project manager. And so she was very much into, she's a kind of driven type A type personality. And now that she's injured, she has to find the other side of herself. She has to find the patient. I got to trust in the process. I can't push this. It's out of my control. And so somehow, in a strange way, when you go through a process of healing like this, in a way, you can get more whole, parts of yourself that
Mm,
you had forgotten, you start to integrate. And so there is, it's important to understand that this healing process is not all about like there's something wrong with me, and you
mm.
know, it is really a chance at kind of starting over again, and looking at things that you might have overlooked. And I think that when it's looked at in that way, it's a really healthy process. It's the reasons for our illnesses is out of our control for the most part. And it's really lovely to look at a healing process from a positive point of view, and to see it as a place where there can be immense learning.
Yeah, as absolutely learning is not lacking. It's so the learning, the challenge with the learning is not a challenge actually. The 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 beauty of the learning is that it's so deep.
Right.
It's really deep. It's not open the book, read the first 10 chapters, tell me what the book said. It's tell me what the book means.
Mm,
Tell me
right.
what's in the author's mind, heart, in
Mm,
soul. Tell me that. That's the part.
mm,
That takes
mm,
work. That takes a long time. Um,
mm,
and it takes a lot of conversations with people like yourself, who come from what I noticed is that these deep conversations with people like yourself and some of the other amazing people I've interviewed that work with people who are recovering from brain injuries is that they come from a different place of philosophy, for example, thinking, upbringing, whatever, but they're all working at the same location. They're all working on the person's identity. They're all working on the person's soul. They're all working at a deeper level. They're not working on, let's see you walk.
mm,
They understand that it's not, the walk is the secondary part of the recovery. It
mm,
seems like it's the most important part, but it's not. I often say to people who listen to my podcast is that, recovery um, gets allocated by the doctors with what they can see first, which is, well, the person's not walking well, let's get him to walk. But what the doctors don't know to do, and perhaps don't have the resources to do, is explain that emotional recovery and and mental recovery is just as important as the physical recovery, and they are all interlooped. You can't just do the physical recovery without tending to the emotional recovery and the mental recovery. You have to do all three. And under those three particular headings, emotional, physical, and mental, there might be other subcategories, and you can place whatever you want in that subcategory. It could be spiritual, could be part of the emotional recovery, or religious. For mental, it could be, uh, thinking critically or curiously or in a new childlike way. Um, the physical recovery might be, yes, that I'm doing something that appears to be walking, but it's actually learning that thing that we spoke about earlier, which was to trust in the body's feedback, that I don't have to overthink it and overcorrect it and over tell her what to do, and to accept what my body's telling me and learn the new language that my body is giving me. So it's a very it, this the depth of the learning for me to recover to the point that I am today, and to continue to recover, has been, I've learned more in 10 years than I ever learned in 37 years. Let's put it that way.
mm,
It's so
mm.
much more. I'm not sure if the word is intense. I'm not sure if it's intense, if that's the right word, because it's not a bad intense. It's a really jam packed, full of information, deep learning stuff. It's nothing I ever experienced before the age of 37. And yeah, it's just nothing. Oh, I can't explain it. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I totally agree. The walking is a secondary. Walking, crawling, rolling, whatever it is that you have to relearn. Um, you know, that is definitely the way other people will see it. They see the progress through the lens of your body, and they'll look on the outside and say, oh, oh, I see you're able to do that, and that's where they'll see it. Um, but inside, with the person and with, you know, relationship with the therapist, it's the process, you know, it's all the gaps in between that lead from one place to the other that actually is where the real learning is taking place, you know, that. And it's obviously nice to reach that milestone, but you know, that process is like is the key. And the other thing I think is interesting, speaking of polarities, is that, you know, there's this depth of understanding which is coming to the bottom of, like, you know, childhood and just these really primal states of being where you're able to move your body. But I like this also spiritual side of the situation. And what I mean by spiritual is, uh, you know, I work with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and so the spirituality, as defined by the religion or something, maybe is, you know, can be quite varied. But I feel like, um, you know, underneath all of that is this concern for mortality and, you know, universal human concerns, you know, that does just cuts across lines everywhere, age and race, religion, whatever it is. And that part of it, you know, again, this is hard to talk about, but it plays a huge part
Mm.
in the recovery, like how you see the meaning of your life, and
Mm.
what motivates you, what should motivate you, what, you know, because you need to be so grounded when you're in that situation. I think everyone's uprooted to such an extent, you know, because you're not sure if you're going to get it back, or, you know, and you're dealing with, well, so what does it all mean to put it all back together again? And in the story that I sent you with Dylan, I really feel like, even though he's only 16 years old, I
Mm.
feel like the experiences that he's had, you know, being close to death, feeling sort of like separated from other people, you know, there's this whole people, society, and stuff, and he's in it, but he's also kind of observing it in his, because
Mm.
he's got a very particular situation. Um, he had to learn to find an inner strength in inside himself, and that inner strength, I can't really describe exactly how and how you go about getting that, but I think it is about somehow confronting your situation and just coming to terms with what's happening with you, and somehow accepting that and letting yourself um, flow with it, to be
Mm.
okay with it, and to start to say, hey, I'm gonna live this, I'm gonna live it, and I'm gonna live it as fully as I possibly can.
Mm.
And somehow um, there's a point where there's something unleashed that can happen, you know,
Mm.
in this film. He goes to Niagara Falls, he has this thing, and I feel like, you know, that was just a day trip, but this is something that I felt was happening inside of him. Like he had been like plateaued out, and he had kind of lost a little bit, he was getting a little frustrated, a little bit uh um cynical, it's just
Mm.
losing a little bit of that drive. And he started finding it, I could feel him starting to find it, and I can't point to exactly what and how
Mm.
that was happening, but he was really starting to come to the other side of life where it's like, yeah, you know what, I can live through this, I can put myself into the situation in my life that it is now, and I can really live and try to figure out what I can do in that.
I love what you said about Dylan, because it's a universe. So what I've discovered in my nearly 260 episodes is that it's universal. What you described is universal, and it's cross. It does, age is no barrier. What is interesting, the main common thread is the traumatic experience.
Mm.
Now, in my example, it's traumatic experience as a result of stroke. But I imagine in other communities where we're not talking about traumatic brain injury, it's the traumatic experience, the risk to life, the deep injury, the having to withdraw from society for a little while, whatever the reason being. And it's that traumatic experience which uh, which puts everything on the line. And I think that it's our innate nature, it's within us to go to the place that you just described as part of our innate way of finding ourselves and then coming out of the hole that we've ended up in. And one of the good things about that for me was that it happened as a result of a brain injury, because my brain was offline and my ability to overthink things went away. And I just went to almost instinct, core, deep, ancestral instinct. And I did what my gut was telling me to do. And my gut was guiding me, and all I had to do was take action down that direction. I didn't even cognitively know the direction I was going down. So when I experienced my brain injury, I explain it as my head went offline completely. And even though I was doing the rudimentary tasks of talking, answering questions, and, doing chores and doing all the things that make somebody appear to be normal and inhabiting the world normally, my head wasn't able to do the kind of processing that I had done before 37. It wasn't able to do it. And I never knew where to go. I never knew how to go there. I didn't have the intellect, the intelligence, the philosophical understanding, the deep study from my past to draw on. It just went there. And this is the result of that. I came to be in this space from going to a place where I had no idea where it was or how to get there. There was no roadmap. Nobody told me to go there. I just ended up there. And what's beautiful about it is, what's great about having a brain injury at such a young age is that if you get away with it, the damage is not catastrophic. You have the opportunity to gain that level of wisdom at such an early age. And if you live another 70 years after that, that could make for a potentially unbelievable existence and a massive impact on the planet. And I'm grateful that I went through what I went through at 37, because I felt my life wasn't leading to anything particularly important at 37. My family was loving and I was in a good relationship and my kids loved me, but I was terrible to be around, because I used to bring my problems home. I used to take it out on my kids. I used to be angry. I used to be yell and scream. I used to be one way. There's only one way, my way. And all that stuff had to go away when I had to go to this place of, how do I redo me? How do I be me? How do I discover how to move forward without my head? And it's making for an amazing, it's the foundation for an amazing another 10, 20, 30 years ahead. I've done 10 or 11 now, and that's resulted in a podcast, a book, a coaching, a course, all things that were not possible before for me to develop and be a part of and deliver and put out there and offer to people. Your background, your particular background interests me because your Japanese heritage.
Yes.
And I know the Japanese have a particular interest in the gut. And they have a description of the gut, which is hara. Can you give me a bit of an insight as to what, if any, of your traditional sort of Japanese heritage and upbringing and culture, how that has helped to shape your journey into this space? And also, what about the gut is really important in the Japanese culture?
Yeah, the Eastern culture in general have a very strong tradition in body-mind kind of things, meditation, yoga. These are all different from Western culture, which deals more with sort of that higher level thinking philosophy, there's a praxis that that happens. In other words, that in whether it's a painting, an ink painting or something, you're trying to put a little bit of your internal energy and flow into mark your work, as opposed to just what you achieve on the outside. So definitely it's influenced me. It's not a direct connection. I was actually born here in Ottawa. My parents were immigrants, so it's not direct. But I feel like, culturally speaking, I think there's just this kind of this kind of through line that happens. But all that discussion of like hara and stuff is all about working with the the perceptions, the energies, like in the East, you call it energies and stuff like this. But, it's just basically what you feel inside, your internal experience, the flows that you feel, and just things are always circulating inside of you all the time. And that tradition of looking at things is very related to body mind, and it relates also pragmatically to the methods that you use. So instead of like working with lots of machines and stuff, or working from the point of view of functional exercises, you're first starting out with things like body work, massage, meditation. Meditation was huge. These are things that, again, are ways that are part of your tools when you're starting from that kind of mindset. You're not just working with medications and exercise routines and things like that. You're working with things where you're really looking inside yourself and trying to gain a grounding self-awareness of what all this is about.
When you come across somebody new to work with, or somebody comes across you and they approach you for work or support, I'm not sure what you'd call it. Perhaps it's not work. It sounds like it's you don't feel like it's work. It sounds like it's just what you love to do. What's the process? Is there an evaluation process? How do you assess the person that is coming to you and saying, I'm struggling with this, I've experienced this, and I need some support?
It's exactly what you said earlier. It's like, it's all interlinked. A person's whole life history is interlinked with everything. So, the process just really just starts with talking. As we're talking, you just find out how the person thinks, how they feel, and in the process of doing that, you learn so much. I had a woman once from Mexico, for example. She had complained about a bad back and stuff. And, instead of going through treatment, the first thing I asked her is just, how does she deal with pain? She had such interesting things to say. She'd say, this is how I deal with pain, Yuji. I feel pain, and then I grit my teeth, and I don't say anything to anybody. Then I go home, and I go about my chores, and I do it. And then right around evening time, I'm washing the dishes or something, and I just scream. And just knowing that defined everything for me. Like, it wasn't about like, oh, it's your lower back and your disc and stuff. First, I just realized, okay, so you're the type of person, when you feel pain, she presses in and represses that pain, and she just, she doesn't communicate it at all. And that's the first thing you have to learn. You have to learn that your pain isn't meant. Like, you don't ignore your pain. Like, your pain is a signal right off. And first thing you have to do is not like hold it and like keep it inside. You got to immediately start to figure out how to release and stuff. So it's things like this, like information that comes around from lifestyle and the way that you approach pain. She was a very proud person, and she was like, no one's going to ever see me feel pain. And again, that was more a part of the therapy initially. And so you can learn a lot from just talking to people and finding out their way of going about things, about the way they're going about life. And by doing that, you kind of see how they might be treating their own body.
Interesting. if they're not expressing how their physical pain manifests, I imagine they're not expressing how their emotional pain manifests.
Correct. That's correct. I had another woman. She was from Brazil. She was the grandmother of the mother whose child I was working with. And, she was like, I noticed that she was in the kitchen. She was having trouble lifting up her plate. She'd have to hold up her head. And I said, oh, I'll take a look at you. And because she only spoke Portuguese, her daughter had to come in and sort of translate everything I was saying. And she had to, during this time, the daughter was realizing, oh my gosh, I never realized my mom had pain. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, she's like, I have a 9 pain. Daughter's like, you never told me this. What's going on? And she and I told her, every pain that you're not saying is a secret. You're holding a secret. You're holding that secret. And that secret is something. That's something. And when you're ready to say that's something, you tell me. And a few sessions later, she was getting physical releases and stuff, starting to learn and trust the process. She says, Yuji, I have a secret to tell you. And I said, what is it? And she said, you know what? She had come from a line of doctors, and her aunt had died of ALS. And she was afraid she had ALS. And she was so afraid she didn't want to tell anybody. She didn't even want to tell herself. And so when she had a pain, she said, oh, this could be ALS. And if it was, so I'm just going to ignore the pain. I'm just going to not pretend it's that. This is the kind of stuff. It's secrets, and pains are like that. Every pain has a story, has something that's connected to it in terms of your emotion, your past history, the way you handle things. And as you start to learn about that relationship that you have with your pain in your body, that's when you start to understand, okay, this is what I've been, or this is what I am. And now to get myself out of this situation, I might have to do things differently.
Yeah. I imagine that not attending or giving the pain any airtime is a problem, but also
Yes.
perhaps giving it too much airtime is a problem. Tell me about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. The pain can be treated like an enemy. And, so either you suppress it because you don't want to know about it, or you don't want other people to know about it, or you start to get into a conflict with it. You start to feel like, oh, this pain. You start to vent. You start to rage. You start to complain. You start to you go. You start to cry at the God. There's one person that told me that she said, God, why'd you do this to me? Like there's this whole thing that you can get into this relationship with pain that can like really make you feel like a miserable like person, because you're just focusing on the pain. You don't know what to do with it. And, you really have to come to a situation where, as hard as it is, you have to understand the pain is not just in an incoherent signal. It's something your body's telling you. There needs to be some adjustment. Something can be done about that pain. It's not just always about popping a pill. There's something that you have to do. Do you have to relax? Do you have to like give yourself time? Do you have to look inside that part of your body, and sometimes you have to ask for help. There's all sorts of things that pain is telling you, and you have to come to terms with that and realize this is like a terrible thing, but there is a meaning to it. It's not senseless. It's not just all sound and fury. It's actually telling you something. There's content there.
Yeah, content. And then also the pain might be telling you that you have to attend to something emotionally, mentally, physically, but also you might have to get help from the medical profession.
Yep. Yeah. There's nothing here that, everybody, there's all parts of the puzzle that you have to do. I had a finger, see, this is a finger that I ran through a table router. It's like, when I hit it, it just went like this. And thank God the nerves could run down the side and the top here. But, when I was doing that, I literally looked down at it, and I was in the emergency room, and I was like, I can't move this. there's no amount of thing that I can do, like, and they told me that the ligament had separated from the bone. That's a medical thing. Don't, no amount of meditation or anything is going to do that. You need that tendon attached, and it's just the pulley system, and that's the way it works. So for sure, there's nothing here that's non-medical. There's no polemic against medicine.
Yeah.
There are things that medicine does really, really well.
Yeah.
But there are some things that it misses. And as you said, I think it's not well equipped to deal with the questions that that we can deal with body man. How do you feel? What's your strategy with pain? What kind of environment do you need? Supportive environment do you need for your healing process? Sometimes when you go in the hospital, the absolute worst places to feel comfortable to be in. It's so intimidating and so sterile, and so they do things, amazing things happen, but there's also recognition, I think, that they're starting to see that they need this ecology, and I like to call it that, an ecology of people. It's your people who are close to you, your caregivers, your therapists, but other people, other things, your environment, everything. It all comes into play when you're dealing with things. You have to find an environment and a whole ecology that works for you.
Yeah. It's interesting with the medical professional. They're like motor mechanics. There's the motor mechanic that likes to see you maintain your vehicle when you bring it to him or her for a service. All it needs is the oil replaced. You haven't you've paid attention to the tires. You haven't run it up against the wall and scratched the heck out of it and had panels missing. You've attended to it, and he's happy to see you. You turn up and he says, wow, oh, well, the car's looking great. All we got to do is fix it for you. It's going to cost this much. See you at the next service. And then there's those other motor mechanics that can't wait for somebody who's terrible at looking after the car to turn up, because they're counting the dollars. They're going, I'm going to charge him for this, and I'm going to charge him for that, and I'm going to charge him for that. Those doctors, they exist in both, those people exist in both worlds, in the medical profession and in the automotive profession. And I feel like and that's within them. It's not part of their training. The training for a motor mechanic is not to make sure that their clients look after their cars when they're not at the mechanic's workshop.
Right.
Their job is to take the faulty part out and replace it with a new part. It's your responsibility to bring the car to them in as good condition as possible, so that they can spend the least time, money, and effort in restoring it and getting it back to you, so that it's safe and so that it serves its purpose. The doctors have the same role. You go there, they expect you to do all the work to keep yourself fit and well, and they will fix you when they can. And yes, there are some doctors who will go, yeah, well, I get paid if I do surgeries. Why don't we just take that out of you? Or, yeah, why don't we replace that? Or why don't we fix this part of you that you don't like? There's doctors that will do that. But none of them are going to send you home and say, okay, now when you go home, meditate on your pain, your suffering, your past traumas, and make yourself feel better, so that you bring to me a better vessel of yourself when you visit next time. That no one's going to do that. It's not their job. It's our job. Part of the thing you asked me earlier about how the podcast came to be before we started the interview.
Yes.
And part of it was because I needed to share with people these things that I learned that helped me. When I went to hospital, again, this was instinctive. I'm reflecting on it now, nearly 7 years after my brain surgery, and talking about it in this manner, but I didn't specifically know that I was doing it at the time. Is when I went there, I made it my decision to bring the best possible physical, emotional, and mental version of me into the operating theater before surgery happened. Because I knew that the surgeons, they just dealt with whatever lump of meat turned up that day that was going to be on the table. And if I wanted to ensure that they had as good a job as possible, and if I wanted to make it just, I wanted them to do nothing other than brain surgery. I didn't want them to worry about my blood sugar, my blood pressure, my blood vessels. I didn't want them to worry about that stuff. Just to take out the faulty blood vessel that was bleeding in my head. So I sent them, I gave them the gift of the best possible vessel so that they could have a successful brain surgery. That was it.
Yes. And I think this is a really healthy attitude. It is unfortunate that maybe medicine of the future will change. But yeah, they're in the business of fixing things and not,
Yeah.
once they're broken and not trying to keep something in health. And,
Yeah.
for my finger, for example, when I went in, I had a choice. I decided to do it without, just with local anesthetic. I didn't want to go under because I didn't want to do that. So I was actually conscious through the whole thing. And it was, as you said, literally I could feel my finger over here and it was being pounded on. Like it literally felt like I was just a piece of lumber and I was, but they did a good job. And, for what they need to do, they did their thing. But yeah, it's not just the surgery. It's not just the treatment. It's not the medication. There's this whole after thing that needs to happen. And that's where, again, where the person who is undergoing that rehabilitation feels like that's, as you said, they have to bring themselves to that process. And that's where, that person is really comes into the fore.
Yeah.
It's not a condition anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's and that's hopefully that wraps up the whole conversation that we had as to how we move through those phases and those processes and those troubles that we've been faced with because of this medical emergency that we underwent. The other part of that for me was that I'm really good at noticing patterns. Sometimes I don't know what to do with the patterns that I notice, but I notice patterns that might take a while. What I hope that people get out of the podcast is I hope that they pick up the pattern of the last 260 or so episodes of how people have gone about their healing journey, their recovery, and what's common in that. It's the stroke recovery process is not about listening to one podcast episode and then putting it down. Hopefully what the people who are on episode 262 or 63, I think this is going to be, hopefully the people that are on that have also listened to another 20, 30 or 40 episodes before this so that they can pick up the pattern of how people have moved through their journey from the beginning to the phase that they are at now, whichever part of the recovery that is. And what I discovered in this journey early on was that there was a book to be written that was about the fact that stroke is the best thing that ever happened to me. But it wasn't just my story. And the reason why that actually occurred, why that became a book, is because there's other stroke survivors that say that, many, many, many of them. Not only stroke survivors, there'll be cancer survivors, heart attack survivors, and so on. And the pattern, once you see it, is impossible to unsee.
Right. Exactly.
And you might be on the journey of stroke recovery, and you might not have been at the part of the recovery where you can say it's the best thing that ever happened to you from a philosophical level, because it's definitely not the best thing that happened to people from a physical level sometimes, and that's understandable. And you might have inadvertently discovered the 6 things in the pattern, but you're missing 4 of the things in the pattern. And hopefully what I'm doing here is demonstrating to people the interviews might sound repetitive, right? But we know that mastering anything is just repetition after repetition after repetition after repetition, and then getting nuanced differences and improvements all the time, and then honing the skill and getting better and better. Just like you started in physics, you applied what you learned in physics to dance, and now you applied what you learned in dance and physics to the work that you're doing now.
Yes. And I totally agree with your assessment that, that there are many different voices. We're all kind of working on the same, same area. And I really truly believe, again, that there is a universal sort of education process that we go through. And, the path may be different, and there might be different ways that we sort of come about that. But it's important for us to know that for people who are injured, that there's a sort of general evolution that we go through, and that general evolution can give a lot of comfort to people to understand that it's not an arbitrary process. It's not like just things happen, but it's like the human body is this amazing vessel that that evolves, and the brain is an amazing organ that can regenerate itself, and it does so in this again as a process of learning. And when you get really comfortable with that idea, when I work with kids right now, for example, I see that process. So even no matter how severe the situation is, I know that from here there's a whole path that extends out to there, and there's no reason to put an arbitrary cap on that. You just have to live it and keep seeing what unfolds.
Yeah. Your work is done primarily from the United States. Where do you base yourself?
I'm in Toronto.
Uh-huh.
I have a studio there called the Spiral Movement Center, and that's where I'm based. But as I said, nowadays I travel. There's a lot of demand for kids, especially with kids with disabilities, and so I go around and I visit families, and I work with families in their homes. Right now I'm in Georgia, working with two children with CP.
Do you have people supporting you? Is it just
Uh
you?
no, I have a small staff, and but this is a growing there's a growing awareness for this kind of approach and work and stuff. And so I think that even PT work is 70 years ago, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, this is where it really started happening. So there's still a lot to learn about everything, and I think we're just still evolving. And right now I feel that this body mind work is on the cutting edge of a lot of that kind of work. The medicine is gone way beyond the therapy. Therapies and there's so much to therapy that hasn't been explored yet. All these combinations of what we've been talking about: body, the cognitive, the spiritual, the emotional, all of these come into play. And I'm not alone. I feel like there's a lot of people who are interested in that kind of thing, and this is what's happening right now. And even the medical field, as I said, is open to my work, and so it's a really lovely time for people to be exploring this kind of area.
Yeah, you're not alone. I interviewed a lady called Annette Banyel, who
Oh yes, yes, yeah.
you know of Annette.
Yeah. I met with her actually at a
Huh.
conference. She came. Yeah.
Okay, and that's amazing. So she does similar work to you. She just
Yes.
describes it differently. You have a very beautiful, unique way of expressing the kind of work that you do, and I see the similarities in the work that you do with Annette. And of course, this type of work has been around for a long time. Moshe Feldenkrais was doing similar kind of work, and perhaps describing it differently many decades ago in the late, I think, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and even into the 70s. So it's been around for a long time. I love the idea of I love the idea of the different versions of ways that this work is being described now, and that opens up the possibility for people who appreciate your way of describing things to understand if somebody is a personal, if is a somebody if is a occupational therapist or a physical therapist. I would love them to get curious about how to apply the kind of work that you're talking about into their space, into their work, so that it's not just the let's see you pick up a cup and put it down, and let's help you pick up that cup and put it down better.
Yeah. I'll just say with this real is that the work, as far as the work is concerned, it's been around for thousands of years. Again, this whole emphasis of body mind has been around for forever. and I feel like though right now, and this is a very strong part of, I want everyone to understand though that I have a very strong background in science and stuff, and for me, and what I think that my work has to offer the community at right now is that a lot of times with holistic practices we kind of think like it's just a feeling or vibe that we're putting off, but it's not that, it's not the case, that there are a lot of very rigorous techniques that we apply, and not just on the bodywork side of things. So for example, for Dylan, you want to change his posture, you want to get rid of his pains, and there are many bodywork things that advanced bodywork techniques that you can do to do that. But even further, working cognitively and working emotionally, there are more modern, more active type meditations that we're developing, and people in this field. So this is a very exciting time where I think we sort of had that demand. We went through a big exploratory time in the 60s where it was just sort of just trying different things, but now it's in a very technical place. And this is what excites me, is that again, there is a place in the medical field for this kind of work. There's just a lot of research and technical things that we're working on that I think is also part of the big story right now with Body Mind.
Yeah, fantastic. Where's the best place that people can go to connect with you and to see some of the work that you do? Is there some online places where they can find you?
Yes. I do. My adult site is called spiralpraxis.com. It's spiral and then praxis, praxis.com. And then for my kid work, there's a place called spiralmovement.org. And so if anyone wants to take a look at my work, yes, they can visit those websites. Fantastic.
I'll encourage people to do that. I'm going to have links to your website and to Dylan's story, because it's a very great little video there, documentary there, that describes the process that somebody can go through and the outcomes that they can achieve. And I really want to thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for the work that you do and for giving me your time.
Okay, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation about the mind-body connection with Yuji Oka. Now, to learn more about my guests, including links to their social media and other pages, and to download a full transcript of the entire interview, please go to recoveryafterstroke.com/episodes. If you would like to support this podcast, the best way to do it is to leave a 5-star review and a few words about what the show means to you on iTunes and Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, comment below the video, like this episode, and to get notifications of future episodes, subscribe to the show on the platform of your choice. Thanks again for being here and listening. I really appreciate you, and see you on the next episode.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gassiamis. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation consultation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.